My wife cheated with my best friend while we were building our startup. Years later, they begged me for help, but my answer made them tremble. I'm 38, male, and this story starts years ago when I was in college. Let me take you back to college. I wasn't exactly the outgoing type. I spent most of my time in the computer lab or buried in textbooks, teaching myself coding and dreaming of one day starting my own tech business. Coding was my thing. It was like solving puzzles that actually mattered. I didn't have a ton of friends back then, just a few close ones who got me. That's where Mia comes in. I met her during my sophomore year in an econ class. I was barely passing. She was the kind of person who seemed to have it all together. She always knew the answer, had perfect notes, and carried herself with this quiet confidence. I noticed her right away, but I was way too shy to approach her. That changed one day when she saw me frantically flipping through my notebook in the library, trying to cram before an exam. She walked over, sat down across from me, and said, "You're using the wrong syllabus." Then she handed me her notes, color-coded, perfectly organized, and way better than anything I had. She added, "You owe me coffee," with this little smirk. And that was the beginning of everything. We started studying together, and before long, it wasn't just about class. We'd talk for hours about life, ambitions, and the kind of future we wanted. Mia was smart and driven, the kind of person who made you believe anything was possible. I'll admit, I fell for her hard. Meanwhile, my best friend Luke was my other constant. Luke and I had been inseparable since high school. If I was the awkward guy who preferred computers to people, Luke was the opposite, confident, charming, and able to talk his way into and out of any situation. We balanced each other out, and together we'd spent years dreaming about starting a business. Fast forward to after college. Mia and I started dating seriously during senior year, and about a year after graduation, we got married. Luke was my best man, delivering a speech that had everyone laughing and tearing up. At that moment, I felt like I had everything: a wife who believed in me, a best friend who had my back, and a future that looked bright. Life after graduation wasn't glamorous, though. I worked long hours at a small tech company, coding all day and saving every penny I could. Luke landed a sales job, but we stayed in touch, meeting up on weekends to brainstorm business ideas. Mia, meanwhile, took a job in finance, though she hated the corporate grind. After a couple of years, Luke and I decided to take the leap. We quit our jobs, pulled our savings, not much, and started a small app development company. Our idea was to create apps that made everyday purchases easier, things like ordering food or booking tickets with just a few taps. It wasn't groundbreaking, but we believed we could do it better than anyone else. We started small, working out of Luke's garage with second-hand equipment and mismatched furniture. Luke handled the business side, pitching to potential clients and securing deals, while I focused on building the apps. We didn't have much, but we had drive, and we were determined to make it work. Mia was there every step of the way. She was my biggest supporter, always encouraging me when things got tough. She'd stay up late with me, listening to me vent about bugs I couldn't fix and helping me brainstorm solutions. One night over takeout, she joked that she should quit her job and join us full-time. At the time, we laughed it off, but the idea stuck with me. About a year into the startup, Mia made the switch. She left her corporate job and officially became our operations manager. It made perfect sense. She was great with numbers, hyper-organized, and knew how to handle the stuff Luke and I didn't want to deal with, like schedules and budgets. The three of us worked like a well-oiled machine. Luke and I would brainstorm new app features and hash out designs, while Mia made sure we stayed on track. We weren't making much money, but we were building something we believed in, and that felt like enough. Our first big break came when one of our apps, a ticket purchasing platform, caught the attention of a small group of investors. They gave us enough funding to move out of Luke's garage and into a tiny office space. It wasn't fancy, just a couple of desks crammed into a room with flickering lights and peeling paint, but it felt like we'd made it. Mia threw herself into the job, taking care of operations, while Luke and I focused on development. The three of us spent late nights in the office, brainstorming, troubleshooting, and celebrating small wins. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were on the verge of something big. Those were some of the best days of my life. I had a wife who believed in me, a best friend who shared my vision, and a company that felt like it was finally going somewhere. We weren't just coworkers, we were a family. For a while, everything seemed great. The startup wasn't exactly printing money, but we were making steady progress. It felt like we were unstoppable. We worked long hours, but we had a rhythm that worked. Our office was cramped and the AC barely functioned, but there was an energy in the air, like we were building something that could really take off. We were a team in every sense of the word. Then things started to shift. At first, it was little stuff. Mia and Luke started texting each other more often, even outside of work hours. It didn't bother me at first, our work often bled into personal time, so it seemed normal. But then the texts started getting more frequent, and they'd laugh about inside jokes I wasn't part of. When I'd ask what was so funny, Mia would just wave it off with, "Oh, just something about the client meeting," and Luke would nod along. I didn't think much of it at the time. We were all working closely together, so it made sense that they'd communicate a lot. But then there were the late night meetings. Mia started mentioning that she and Luke needed to go over some projections after hours. At first, it was maybe once every couple of weeks, but then it became more frequent. I'd be at home, wrapping up my coding work, while Mia stayed at the office with Luke, just trying to get ahead of the deadlines, she'd say. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We were all busting our butts to make the startup succeed, and Luke and Mia were two of the most important people in my life. I had no reason to doubt them, but then those late night meetings turned into weekend work sessions. Mia would tell me, "We need to hash out some details for the upcoming launch," and she'd spend hours at the office with Luke. Sometimes she'd come home late, looking drained but oddly distant. When I'd ask how things went, she'd give vague answers. "Oh, it was fine. We're making progress." The thing is, I wasn't the kind of guy who second-guessed the people I trusted. I believed in loyalty and giving the people close to me the benefit of the doubt. Questioning every move Mia or Luke made, that wasn't me. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, something just didn't sit right. It wasn't just the late nights and vague excuses. It was the way they both started acting around me. Mia and Luke had always been friendly, but now it felt like they were almost too in sync. Luke, who'd always been my go-to guy for brainstorming or just unwinding after work, started pulling away. He'd cancel our usual hangouts with vague excuses like, "I've got too much on my plate," or, "Maybe next week, man." When we were in meetings together, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, barely engaging with the ideas we were throwing around. He seemed to avoid me as much as possible. Even when we did hang out, it wasn't the same. He'd zone out mid-conversation or give these half-hearted responses, like he wasn't really present. It was subtle at first, but over time, it became glaringly obvious. The guy who used to be my biggest supporter now felt like a stranger, and I couldn't figure out why. One evening, I showed up at the office unexpectedly to drop off dinner. It was a Saturday, and Mia had told me they'd be working late to finalize some budgets. I figured I'd surprise them with takeout since I hadn't seen much of Mia all week. When I got there, the office was quiet, too quiet. I walked in and found Mia and Luke sitting close together, huddled over her laptop. When they noticed me, they jumped slightly, like they weren't expecting anyone. "Oh, hey," Mia said quickly, closing the laptop. "What are you doing here?" "I brought dinner," I said, holding up the bag. "Thanks, man," Luke said, his usual easygoing demeanor kicking in. "We're just wrapping up here." The whole thing felt weird. It wasn't just that they were surprised to see me, it was the way Mia seemed flustered, like she was scrambling to explain something that didn't need an explanation. After that, the nagging feeling in the back of my mind started to grow. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, these were the two people I trusted most in the world. But the little things kept piling up. One evening, I was tidying up the living room while Mia was in the shower. I noticed a small wrapped gift tucked under the couch cushion where she'd been sitting earlier. Curious, I picked it up, thinking maybe it was for me. Our anniversary was coming up. But when I turned it over, I saw a little tag attached, written in bold, familiar handwriting. It read, "Can't wait to see you wear this." My stomach dropped. I carefully peeled back the edge of the wrapping paper and found a delicate bracelet, something far from Mia's usual style, but perfectly matched the kind of gifts Luke had a knack for picking. The handwriting on the tag matched his perfectly. I sat there staring at the gift, my mind racing. Maybe it was for a group gift exchange. Maybe it was just some inside joke I didn't understand. But deep down, the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I didn't confront Mia right away. Instead, I shoved the gift back under the cushion and tried to convince myself there was some innocent explanation. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the signs were stacking up. Mia seemed distracted all the time. She'd barely talk about work, a topic she used to share everything about. And Luke, he started fading out of our usual group activities, skipping hangouts and acting distant when we did cross paths. It felt like I was losing both of them without even knowing why. A few nights later, I couldn't take it anymore. Mia and I were curled up on the couch, watching some show I couldn't even follow because my head was swimming. I took a deep breath and blurted out, "Is everything okay with us? You've been different lately." She turned to me, startled. "What?" "Yeah, of course. Everything's fine." But her eyes, they betrayed her words. And in that moment, I knew everything was far from fine. The day it all came crashing down started like any other. I can't describe how I still hate that day and the memory of it. At that time, I'd been working for weeks on a major investor pitch. This wasn't just any meeting, it was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for our startup. We were asking for significant funding to scale up operations and expand our product line, and this meeting had the potential to secure our future. Normally, Luke would have been right there with me. He was the face of the company, the one who could walk into a room and sell anything to anyone. We'd always pitched as a team. Luke would handle the vision, and I'd get into the technical details. But this time, Luke had waved it off. "You've got this," he'd said, brushing off my suggestion to tag team the presentation. Mia backed him up, claiming they were too busy ironing out internal details to join me. They said it like it was no big deal, like me handling the meeting solo was just the natural choice. It struck me as odd. Luke loved being in front of investors, it was practically his whole personality. And Mia, she was all about preparation. Normally, she'd spend hours going over the numbers with me, making sure everything was airtight. But this time, neither of them seemed particularly invested. Considering that the tension had been building for a while, I could feel the questions demanding answers. I was ready to confront them, to lay everything out and get to the bottom of it. This was the final straw, and I knew I couldn't let it slide any longer. But with the investor meeting looming, I told myself it could wait just a little longer. Right now, I needed to keep my focus sharp and make sure the pitch was flawless. That morning, I walked into the boardroom alone. It felt strange not having Luke by my side, but I shook it off. I had a job to do. The presentation went better than I could have hoped. The investors were engaged, asking all the right questions, and by the end of it, they were nodding along enthusiastically. We got the funding, enough to take the company to the next level. I should have been ecstatic, but as I left the meeting, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Mia and Luke's absence wasn't just about being busy. They'd been weird for weeks, late-night texts, inside jokes, vague excuses about meetings and work trips. But I wasn't sure. Still, I was determined to share the good news, then see why they were acting weird lately. I decided to surprise them at the office. On the way, I stopped at their favorite coffee shop and picked up lattes and pastries. I imagine walking in, seeing their faces light up as I told them about the funding we'd worked so hard for this, and I wanted to celebrate the win together. When I got to the office, it was eerily quiet. I walked in, balancing the coffee tray, and called out, "Hey, guess what?" But there was no response. I figured they were in the conference room. It was their usual spot for these so-called work sessions. As I got closer, I heard voices, and then I heard laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter you'd expect from a work discussion. It was softer, more personal. My chest tightened as I stood there, my hand hovering over the door. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I'd walk in and find some harmless explanation, a perfectly reasonable excuse for the way they'd been acting. But I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open without knocking. And there they were. Mia was sitting too close to Luke, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. The way she leaned toward him wasn't casual, it was deliberate, intimate in a way that didn't belong in any work setting. At first, it didn't register. They'd worked together on plenty of projects, so maybe this was just one of those moments I was overthinking. But then they saw me. The way they froze, their faces draining of color like kids caught red-handed, made my stomach drop. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "What's going on?" Mia jumped up quickly, smoothing out her shirt, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. We weren't expecting you back so soon," she mumbled, glancing at Luke like she needed a lifeline. "I thought you'd still be at the meeting," Luke added, his voice way too casual. "I wrapped up early," I said, stepping further into the room and setting the coffee and pastries on the table. My hands felt shaky, but I tried to keep my movement steady. "Thought I'd bring you guys some good news." They just stared at me, their silence louder than anything they could have said. "What's going on?" I asked again, my tone firmer this time. Mia exchanged a quick glance with Luke, and then she sighed, her shoulders slumping like she was carrying the weight of the world. "Look," she started, her voice soft but somehow sharp at the same time, "this isn't how we wanted you to find out." My heart sank. "Find out what?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer, and that's when it all spilled out. They admitted they'd been seeing each other for months, sneaking around under the guise of work. It had started with late-night meetings and turned into something deeper. According to Mia, it just happened, she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to feel real. "We didn't plan for this." Luke, always quick with the spin, jumped in. "It's complicated, man. We didn't want to hurt you." I just stood there, frozen. Complicated? That's what they were going with? Mia looked down, wringing her hands. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," but I've felt for a while now like we've been growing apart. She hesitated, her voice softening in a way that almost felt cruel. You're always so focused on work, on the technical side of things, and with Luke, it's just different. We connect in a way I don't feel with you anymore. My chest tightened, and for a second, I thought I might be sick. This wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about how she was framing it, like our relationship was some sort of outdated project she'd lost interest in. Luke nodded, chiming in like he was somehow part of this narrative. We didn't mean for this to happen. It's just, we've been spending so much time together, and it made us realize how much we have in common. Mia continued, her voice faltering but not stopping. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. It's not that I don't care about you, I do, but we've been drifting for a while now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't just admitting to the affair, they were justifying it, acting like their connection was some inevitable force of nature, while my relationship with Mia was nothing but an afterthought. I wanted to yell, to smack Luke in his face, to call them out for what they'd done. But instead, I just stood there, numb. Is that all? I asked finally, my voice flat and cold. They exchanged another glance, like they weren't sure if they should say more. Finally, Mia whispered, I'm sorry. Luke nodded, though he didn't seem nearly as remorseful as he should have been. Yeah, man. We didn't want it to come out like this. I stared at him, my eyes narrowing as the weight of his betrayal hit me all over again. This wasn't just anyone, this was the guy I trusted like a brother, the person who had been there through every high and low of my life. And now he was standing there, looking like he wanted to shrug it off and move on. I didn't respond. I just kept glaring at him, my silence heavy with all the things I could have said but didn't. Then I looked back at Mia, her head bowed, her hands fidgeting like she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. The two people I trusted most in the world, and this was how they'd repaid me. Without another word, I turned and walked out. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore, surrounded by reminders of a life that now felt like a lie. I checked into a hotel and tried to process what had just happened. The next day, I filed for divorce. I didn't fight for anything, not the apartment, not my share of the company, not even an explanation. I just wanted out. Let them have each other, and let them have the business we'd built together. I didn't care anymore. Or at least, that's what I wanted them to think. I could see it in their eyes before I walked out of that room. They were bracing for a fight. They thought I'd yell, throw accusations, or make some grand scene, maybe even try to burn everything down with them. But I didn't. My calmness seemed to throw them off, like they couldn't believe I'd just walk away. But what they didn't know was that I had a plan. I wasn't going to stoop to their level, no screaming, no dragging it out in public, no messy confrontation. I decided then and there that the best way to deal with this was to rebuild quietly and let my actions speak louder than anything I could have said in that moment. Of course, walking away wasn't easy. It wasn't just losing Mia, it was losing Luke, the guy I thought would always have my back. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. For weeks, I replayed every moment in my head, trying to figure out how I didn't see the signs. Every late-night meeting, every inside joke, every vague excuse, they all made sense now in a way that made me sick. But no matter how much I overanalyzed, the result was the same. They'd made their choice, and now I had to make mine. The divorce was finalized quickly. I packed up what little I had and moved to a different city. I didn't have a plan, just the faint hope that putting distance between myself and the mess might help me breathe again. The first apartment I found was a tiny studio in a rundown part of town, the kind of place where you hear your neighbors arguing through the walls and the hot water works sometimes. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a folding table I used as a desk and dining table, and a single chair I'd grabbed off the curb. It wasn't much, but it did the job. I started working at a local coffee shop during the day to cover my bills. It paid just enough to keep the lights on. At night, I'd come back to my apartment, open my laptop, and lose myself in the only thing that made sense anymore: coding. You see, back when I was working with Luke at the startup, I'd been quietly developing an idea on the side. It wasn't anything big at first, just a concept for a better way to integrate mobile payment systems with smaller businesses. I'd even emailed it to Luke, thinking it could be a great addition to what we were building. His response was dismissive, too niche, too risky, and not worth the resources. That email stuck with me, not just the words, but the way it felt like he didn't even consider it seriously. I let it go at the time, filed it away in the back of my mind, but I never stopped thinking about it. Now, with nothing to lose and no one to answer to, I started working on it in earnest. Every night, I'd sit at that folding table and dive into the code. The idea consumed me: a seamless payment platform tailored for small businesses, easy to set up, affordable, and scalable. I worked obsessively, driven by equal parts desperation and the need to prove that Luke had been wrong about me. The first year was brutal. I was living on instant noodles and whatever day-old pastries the baristas at the coffee shop gave me at the end of my shift. I barely slept, juggling my job during the day and the endless stream of coding, debugging, and late-night coffee during the night. Still, I kept going. At first, I didn't tell anyone what I was working on. It felt safer that way, like it was mine and no one could take it from me. But as the app started to take shape, I realized I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to a small group of people in the tech space, pitching my idea with as much passion as I could muster. Slowly, things started to click. I'll spare you the step-by-step details of how it all came together. It wasn't a straight path. There were setbacks, moments where I thought it was all going to fall apart, and countless nights where I doubted myself. But eventually, the app gained traction, first with local businesses, then with bigger ones. The simplicity of the platform resonated with people, and the word started to spread. Somewhere along the way, I stopped checking on Mia and Luke. In the beginning, I'd look at their Instagram profiles late at night, hate scrolling through their curated lives. They were still running the startup, still attending fancy events and smiling for the cameras. Making moves, one of Mia's captions said under a photo of them at some tech gala. It stung to see them living the life I'd poured my soul into, the life I thought we were building together. But the busier I got with my own work, the less time I had to care. By the time my app started making headlines, I wasn't thinking about them at all. I'd built a company and an act from the ground up. What started in a cramped studio apartment with a second-hand laptop had grown into something. My team was small but passionate, and the platform was gaining recognition in the tech world. I started getting invitations to speak at conferences, to sit on panels about innovation and mobile payments. Me, the guy who once slept on a mattress on the floor, was suddenly being called a visionary in the industry. It was surreal. Of course, I knew Luke and Mia must have heard about my success by then. They weren't exactly doing great. Whispers had started reaching me through mutual acquaintances, their product launches weren't meeting expectations, and investors were losing patience. The startup was struggling to stay afloat. But I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. I eventually stopped looking at their profiles altogether. It wasn't even a conscious decision, I was just too busy. The demands of running a growing company didn't leave much time for dwelling on the past. What they were doing or not doing didn't matter anymore. One day, an email landed in my inbox from someone I hadn't thought about in years, Luke. At first, I assumed it was spam, but when I opened it, I quickly realized it wasn't. The tone was desperate, a far cry from the cocky, self-assured Luke I used to know. He went on about how things had been rough lately, their startup was floundering, investors had pulled out after a string of failed launches, and they were buried in debt. Apparently, Luke had been ousted by the board, which was darkly poetic considering how he and Mia once acted like they ran the world. At the end of the email, Luke casually mentioned that he'd seen a job opening at a promising tech company, mine, obviously, though he had no clue I owned it, and wanted to throw his name in the ring. He listed his experience and hinted at how his unique expertise could help the business grow. A separate email came from Mia. Hers was dripping with regret, filled with vague nods to poor decisions and wanting a fresh start. She didn't directly ask for a job but suggested we meet for coffee to reconnect. Sitting there, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or be annoyed. After years of silence and everything they'd done, they were asking me for a lifeline. Classic. I forwarded their emails to HR along with a request to schedule an interview for an entry-level position. The day of the interview arrived, and I won't lie, I was curious to see how it would play out. I didn't give them any advanced warning that I'd be there. The position they were interviewing for, junior support specialist. It was a basic job, mostly involving answering customer queries and troubleshooting issues. The starting salary wasn't anything to write home about, but it was a job. I stepped into the interview room and waited, keeping an eye on the clock. When the door finally opened, Luke and Mia walked in together. The moment they saw me sitting at the head of the table, their faces froze. Luke's usual confident demeanor faltered, and Mia looked like she wanted to disappear. Luke. Mia, I said evenly, gesturing to the chairs across from me. Thanks for coming in. They hesitated, exchanging a quick glance before sitting down. So, I began, leaning back slightly, let's talk about the position. Luke tried to recover first, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, sure. Wasn't expecting you to be here. Well, it's my company, I said simply, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. I like to stay involved. Mia fidgeted with the edge of her portfolio, avoiding eye contact. I kept the tone professional, walking them through the job description, the responsibilities, and the salary. They were both too stunned to say much, which gave me all the confirmation I needed that they hadn't expected this. Luke cleared his throat, trying to regain some composure. "This position seems a bit lower level than I thought," he said carefully. "Oh," I replied, feigning surprise. "Well, based on your experience and the recent history of your company, this seemed like the right fit. Unless, of course, you think it's not a good match." Mia finally spoke up, her voice quieter than I remembered. "We were hoping for something a little more aligned with our previous roles." I nodded slowly. "Ah, I see. Unfortunately, we don't have anything higher level available at the moment. But this position could be a great opportunity to, rebuild." The words weren't accidental. Luke's face turned red, and he opened his mouth to respond, but then he closed it again. For a guy who always had something to say, the silence was telling. The rest of the interview went about as well as you'd expect. They stumbled through their answers to basic questions, clearly unprepared for what they were walking into. I could see the frustration bubbling beneath Luke's surface as he realized this wasn't going to end the way he'd imagined. When the interview was over, I stood up and extended a hand. "Thanks for coming in. We'll let you know." They left without another word. Later that evening, I got an email from Luke. It wasn't a thank you note or a follow-up about the interview. It was a rant. He accused me of humiliating him, of using the interview to settle old scores. He claimed that I owed him for the opportunities he'd given me when we were starting out. And then he made his boldest claim yet, that he'd contributed to the core idea behind my app and deserved compensation. I sat there staring at the screen, not sure whether to laugh or be angry. Luke's email was a mess of entitlement and desperation, but it was that last part that stood out. He was trying to stake a claim on something I'd built from scratch, an idea he dismissed as too risky when I first pitched it to him years ago. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I dug through my old email archives and found exactly what I was looking for, the original email I'd sent him back at the startup, outlining the idea. His response was right there too: niche, too risky, not worth the resources. The receipts were clear. "Oh, you guys are going to love this twist." So after Luke's pathetic attempt to land a job at my company, he decided to take things up a notch, or at least he thought he did. He actually tried to sue me. The guy who dismissed my original idea as too niche had the audacity to claim that my company was built on his idea, the same idea he laughed off years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Fast forward to court, and let me just say it wasn't even close. I came in armed with receipts, the email where I pitched the concept to him, his dismissive response, timestamps showing when I started working on the code, and everything else I needed to shut this nonsense down. Luke's case was weak as his excuses during that awkward job interview. The judge ruled in my favor so quickly it felt like they were doing me a solid just to save everyone's time.